Welcome to At Home is Now. My name is Wanaka Oberhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Linda Eastburn. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
It's so exciting to get to know so many people all around the world, and you're one of them. And I would
Yeah.
like to ask you is what excites you most at present, and how does it contribute to your joy and happiness in life?
Well, I just wrote a book called S.P.I, Your Way to Power and Success. And S.P.I is S.P.I. That's superpowered intuition or superpowered insight, however you want to view that. But it's about manifesting life the way you want it to be rather than manifesting all the things that can be distracting, time consuming, and not so much fun. Now, it's not to say that we're going to get away from all the duties we have in life and the chores that are present, but certainly life can be more streamed in a manner that allows us to enjoy it more and be more true to who we are as a person rather than to just be cookie cutter the way a lot of other people want it to be. So I'm excited about talking about that. I'm excited about teaching people how to do that. I'm excited about manifesting.
Okay, and let's go from there. Would you maybe you have a particular process that you like to go? Do you like to start from where it is really difficult or where you're in the midst of turmoil or sickness, or do you want to start somewhere else? It's up to you, but there's a lot of variance there.
Well, the program is kind of a back engineering of my personal life. So manifesting things that seem like impossible, but the SPI program is about remote viewing, actually being able to see things in the future and take advantage of those opportunities that are sitting there for you. And if you don't know they're coming down the line, you don't know those opportunities are there, we often miss them. We just completely avoid them because we're not prepared for them, for one thing, or we're just not able to see that they're present. So I was a real estate investor for a lot of years, still am, but not as actively as I once was. And what I noticed was being able to see these opportunities sitting out there really helped me a lot. So when I wrote this book many years later, it was kind of a back engineering of how that process happened. But I also worked as a health intuitive and still do for many, many years. But that was also just seeing things within a person's dynamic, the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. I could not and did not diagnose anything, but being able to see where energies were lower in someone's physical system, being able to help them to get back to optimal health, possibly, or to get the help that maybe they needed.
Yeah, that's important for many people because
Yes,
you when you're in the midst of it, you're caught up in it and you don't know where it's going, right? You
that's
you
true.
you envision it getting healthy again, but you never know whether that's going to happen or not, unless it's something that you already know is goes by very quickly.
That's
But
true. And sometimes you just see situations that you know will not be necessarily improve a great deal, but if you can just give them comfort, even in some fashion, some way, when they transition. And many times I've done a session, I can see that there's a transition coming. I don't predict death by any means. I think that's beyond what I should probably be dealing with, but I can see a timeline often in a person's future that their energy gets very, very low, very depleted, and it's likely they're going to pass at that time. But that those are always sad situations. But many times it's just a matter of helping to comfort them, making certain that they have everything accomplished that they need to have done prior to, without scaring them and letting them know that the end is super near. Those are difficult sessions to do, but certainly they cross my path a lot as a health intuitive.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine. It's a quite a it's also for people who are not health intuitive or have other skills to deal with that. You need a certain way of working with that in order to stay in your happiness and your well-being as well.
That's true. I mean, one of the good things that, and the way I teach people how to do this, I have professional training courses in the health intuitive field and the SPI technique. like 1-2 year programs and also in hypnosis. So, the people I teach, it's really important to teach them how to disconnect, how to remain objective in the process of that, because you can get really drawn into a situation, and you have to be empathetic and certainly feel a lot of your way through those sessions. But the reality is that you have to be able to disconnect too. You have to be able to feel the difference between yourself and them once you're completed the session. So that's part of the training course as well.
Yeah, because this intuitive insight certainly can often be felt as something going on within you, right, while you're looking. So
Yeah,
that you understand what's going on, right?
Yeah, you merge. And for me, it comes in rather objectively. I can feel it mildly in my system. I don't feel their pain. I can just more, get a sense of it and then be able to describe it. So I can remain fairly objective in the process of it, but you do merge with them and you know things about their system because it becomes a part of who you are. There's an entanglement that happens during that time. But the same thing is true when you're manifesting something. If it's something in the future, you see that opportunity coming about, you can also become entangled with that and make sure that event happens if it's something you want, or make certain that doesn't happen if it's something you don't want. You want to disconnect from it and move away from that and move towards something else, something different. I remember I was a real estate investor and before the crash of 2007, 2008 here in the US, and real estate values plummeted during that time. But a few years before that, like around 2004, somewhere in that ballpark, I got a really clear message to sell my properties. And when the crash happened, I owned absolutely no properties whatsoever. I had owned around 60 before that, and suddenly I did not own any property. So it was one of those times when there was kind of a forewarning, even though I didn't know why. I just knew to do that. So it came about that I didn't own anything. Then I was able to reinvest at around 2009, 2010, started reinvesting again.
That certainly is very helpful if you get that insight and you act on it.
Yeah.
And it's true, and it turns out to be right.
Yes. Yeah, that is so very true. I was very much invested in real estate, however, and then I was also very much invested in doing the intuitive work. So you put those two together, and it was kind of a golden, a golden key to being able to be successful in that. So what the SPI book it's a new book. It's only been out about a year, but my whole goal was, to be able to help people to get to that level where they could trust their own inner knowing, their own inner guidance, to be able to live more of the life they want to live. Thus the title of this show. And because you don't have to live in such a box, and it doesn't have to be quite as stressful. It doesn't have to be quite as overwhelming as we often make life out to be. We can just move ourselves into a position where it's more easy. It's easier because we can have advanced knowledge for one thing, but we can also be prepared for those things that are somewhat more difficult.
Yeah. So when you look at this from the point of view how this came about in your life, maybe you'd like to, because there must have been, I don't know, maybe you had first inklings that you were intuitive when you were very young, and then you started, or you didn't even know how to call it, or you thought it was something else. Maybe you'd like to describe how that came about in your life.
Sure. I wouldn't call myself a very gifted intuitive in my earlier years, even though there were telltale signs. I would have maybe a prophetic dream here and there. People told me later on that I was often, when I was speaking with them, just in a conversation, I would often be talking about things that they had just been thinking about, and they found that kind of odd. So I was probably picking up on people's thoughts and emotions, but I didn't realize I was doing that at that time. So it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I became interested in really developing this more as a skill, because I certainly didn't have control over it. And it had not given me a great deal of guidance, I didn't feel like. But I had another health intuitive gave me a health intuitive session. And it was spot on. And I've been dealing with this one particular issue that wasn't devastating, but still annoying. And I'd gone to doctor after doctor after doctor. No one had been able to resolve the issue. And they, in one session, was able to see exactly what it was and tell me how to resolve it. Now, a lot of that had to do with a stress state. When I would get into a stress state, how it would impact my physical system. So I learned how to not get into that stress, that particular stress state. But if I did, then I could pull myself out of it and, you know, kind of get myself out of trouble by just doing these certain techniques. And it worked. And it was really eye-opening to see that. So that kind of drew me into that area. But I just had a really deep curiosity at that point to learn how to be more intuitive, how to hear that inner voice. So I took some classes. They didn't really teach me how to be more intuitive, but they did give me mental focus and concentration, taught me how to meditate. And in this particular type of meditation I was learning, it wasn't the typical meditation where you just quiet your mind and go within and you have a stillness there. It was more of a dialogue meditation. And that's something I teach people how to do in all my classes as well. It was ask a question before meditating, and then while meditating, just listen for an answer. And it took a long time before answers started coming back. And then I didn't trust those answers. I would write down the question, write down the answer. And I realized after a time, maybe 6 months, that when I really had a need to know of something, and the question reflected that deep need to know, the answer would be there and it would be accurate. But if it was just a random question because it was part of my, you know, my exercise I was doing that day to meditate and ask a question, I didn't have any kind of a real connection to the question. I didn't have any emotional, you know, skin in the game, so to speak, in that endeavor. And so those answers would just be sort of unimportant. So that was one of my first realizations, that if you're going to do this, do it with things that are important to you. And also, I have people come to me for sessions, and oftentimes they'll come out of curiosity. Not very often because my fees are fairly high, but sometimes they'll come out of curiosity and they'll just say, "Oh, just generally tell me what you think. What do you see?" And I realize I've done this enough to know that the general questions, and if you don't have any real deep need to know the answers are not going to be very spectacular. But if you have a real deep need to know something, the answer will be there, and it will be profound, and it will lead you to whatever it is that you're seeking. And so there's a big difference in motivation. Now, way later on, I learned that intent, your inner intent with what you're doing, has far more power than just your thoughts. So you have to know where your heart stands, what your intentions are, what you're seeking, what you're looking for. And when you know that about yourself, you can manifest things more easily, but also the intuitive answers will come back more easily as well. So that's part of the study program that I teach.
That certainly is a very important point to make, that you need to, it's to, I guess, in A Course in Miracles, it says that our mind, our thoughts are so powerful, we can't even imagine. They are so powerful. So we need to recognize that even if they're making something up or making an illusion of something, it's still that the reason why we can think that that's true is because of how powerful our mind is, right?
I would say more. I would say it isn't just the mind, though. I think it's the whole being, and the heart, I think, has a lot more impact than the brain or the mind of the person. They have to work together. But in the book, I talk about light and the biophotons that come from the physical system and how that light impacts. And when you have a great deal of focus, you produce like way more biophotons than you do when you're just idly thinking. So it isn't just every thought and just every feeling that you have. It's more those really focused thoughts and feelings that you have. Those things can be very powerful, like a laser. Think of it like a laser. And if you have a laser, everything is coherent in that light, and it goes to one stream to one thing. But if you have just an overhead light, it just illuminates the entire room, but it doesn't have much potency like a laser does. So that's the difference in how we use our light and how we use our intent, how we use those thoughts and emotions, and how we direct that light to manifest, the things that we really want in life. And there's a lot of learning and skill development in that. So I know there's a lot of law of attraction and all this, and that those are very wonderful tools to use. But when you want to get really serious about being a profound, powerful manifester, you have to use, I think, a little bit deeper skills than just thinking something.
Yeah, it's always a question also of alignment, right? And of
Mm-hmm.
course, in miracles, it describes the will of God as our will. So if we're going against our will, God's will, we are certainly having our thoughts are still very potent, and we might believe the illusions that we're making up and so on because of that.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that there's the actual will, our true will, the one which is aligned, is much will get you what actually is good for you, and that's a very different thing, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think when we know ourselves, we're aligned with that. Our thoughts and emotions. When we really know those inner workings within us, so much of who we are is kind of in a limited box where we don't really know ourselves very well. We don't know that true heart, we don't know that true inner being within us because we're sort of taught who we are and the limitations that we place around ourselves. And thus we also don't know the power of who we are and what we can manifest in life. So first we have to learn how to move out of that limitation, that box of limitation, and get to know who we are. You really can't own yourself unless you know yourself. So if you know yourself, you will be aligned with those deeper parts of your being. And I think that's the beginning stage of each of the classes I teach, is really getting to know who you are first.
Yeah, and making a difference between things that you think you need and have to have and so on,
Mm-hmm.
and what
Mm-hmm.
you actually are there for, right? It's also like this calling. There's a difference between calling and have tos, right?
Exactly. And people often come to me and say, okay, they want me to tell them what their purpose in life is. And I think, and I usually say, if you know your heart, you know your purpose because you know your passions. The things that we are really aligned with, the things that are true to us, we're passionate about. It speaks to us on a different level, a different plane. And those are the things that we need to go for, not the money or the prestige or whatever that is. However, some people may be here on the planet to have fame and prestige. That's not for me to judge. But where your passions lie will definitely take you in the right direction because you'll feel your way through that.
Yeah, and there's also this whole differentiation: what is actually passion and what
Mhm.
is this greed or
Great.
desire for, or whatever other words we may find, right?
Yeah.
Desire, this idea of like you were saying, power or fame or whatever, right? And yeah, like it is possible that you get famous because of what you're passionate about.
Mhm.
Absolutely. but
Yeah.
it's but it's not, but that's because it's part of your path. It's not because you become power because of the power, because you're all power, or you are very, very powerful from the beginning. You've been
Yeah.
given power by your creator, and there's no greater power than the power of the creator. So
It's
yeah.
true. When you're aligned with that source, you have everything you need, to move forward in your world.
Yeah, and I think that's why many of these um, words that are used to describe that, like, if God is with you, nothing can be against you, right?
Mhm.
Or nothing can withstand that. But of course, that you need to understand what God's will is, and it's certainly not the will to harm, or to harm
Right.
others,
Right.
or to overpower them, even though that has been described like that very often. right? It
Yeah.
still isn't the case. It doesn't mean that when people believed that it was God's will that they didn't, there was not a lot of power behind it. There always is, right? But it was not, doesn't mean it was God's will or the will of the Creator.
Yeah, and I think that people often look at their power somehow that that they're going to misuse that or something. There's a little fear, involved with that. But the way that I approach teaching people is really, you can't do this without getting into a state of deep compassion and love in your heart. And love is the highest vibration on the planet. So if you're in that state of compassion, love, and caring, and also the ethics behind what you're doing, then it's always going to manifest things in the most positive of way, the good, in a good way for you. Even looking at the future and seeing those opportunities, I always say go into the highest vibratory state that you can with love and compassion, because that will lead you toward those things that will work out well and be good for you, rather than those things that would be harmful in any way to yourself or anyone else.
In A Course in Miracles, it says means and end are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning you can't get something if you're not living in that spirit already, right? So it's
Right.
like, so this is why you need to, like you were saying, qualities of compassion, of love, and so on. These qualities need to be part of the journey. And that's why it's always so full of harmfulness when there's something else behind it, like greed or wanting to overpower or thinking you're smarter than everyone else, and therefore you can have everything, and so on. And so there's so many mechanisms out there where people think that gives them the right to do things in a way that is not compassionate and loving.
True. And, I always had a really hard time working without opening that heart chakra. And I had an experience that happened to me. And if you'd like, I'd go ahead and share that. It was kind of early on when I was learning the intuitive work, and I didn't have a lot of word definitions for it. I was just really new at doing this. But I'd opened a little shop. And while I was real estate investing too, I opened this little shop in this little touristy community just to develop my intuition. And I was doing just really, really simple little intuitive sessions for people that would come through, and it, in order to help me to understand how to do this better. I also had gifts and books and some antique items there at the store. And a woman came in or made an appointment for an intuitive session. And it's like, it was probably a little bit over my head of what I knew how to do at the time, but we made the appointment, and she was coming in on a Sunday evening. The shop was closed at that time. So, I was going to do the session up front at a little antique table I had up there. So back in the back of the shop was this little crystal ball. It was just a decorative little item back there in the back. And I thought, I'm going to move that up to the table, even though I kind of criticized myself because I don't use any physical items. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just intuitively go in and connect with the person. But as I'm carrying this little crystal ball up to the table, I'm like, what are you, a crystal ball reader now? So it was kind of putting myself down for that, but I set it up there anyway. So she came in and she had a lot of questions, and none of them were about her health. And I was definitely not a health intuitive at that time, because I intended to stay as far away from that as possible, because I knew absolutely nothing about the physical system, to be able to do that. But at the end of the session, she simply asked me the question if I could get in touch with her guardian angel. And I didn't know if I could or not. I didn't have any idea how to do that. But the only thing I could do was go inward and see what came through. But immediately I knew to pick up that little crystal, and I put it between my hands. And there was this really strong sensation went up my arms and into my heart. And my heart chakra just completely opened with the deepest level of love and compassion I think I'd ever felt. And the words that came through were just coming through so fast, I couldn't get them out fast enough. And it was all about her health. And I was describing, a disorder that she had, even though she looked perfectly healthy. She was a younger woman in her 40s, and, she looked fine. And she hadn't mentioned anything about having a health issue. So I presume she was okay. But anyway, all of this information came forth about how she needed to take care of herself. She wasn't getting proper sleep. She needed to change her diet. And there's just a slew of information that came through. And at that point, she, when I came out and opened my eyes, she's just kind of looked at me like, well, where did that come from? And I'm in the same place. It's like, well, I don't know where that came from, but it came through. So I had to just look at that information as something beyond what my conscious mind held. This wasn't information I knew. Certainly didn't know her. It's the first time I'd ever met her. I had no idea who she was. But anyway, this information came through. And at that point, I recognized that as long as my heart space is in the right place, that I can trust that information to come through for me. And, and then she did verify also that she did have a debilitating disorder. She was on disability, and all of the things I described in her lifestyle were true, and she needed to take care of herself. And so it was all accurate, but I just wasn't giving that intuitive voice a lot of credibility at that point. And so I had to do that. I had to step up and have a lot of respect for the skill that was developing within me, and to be able to take that into some place that could be useful to myself, for myself and others.
Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful way of putting it, that you were just seeing what worked, right? Mm-hmm. By offering this service. And yeah, I think that's part of the process of getting to know what works and what doesn't, right? Is actually doing the work.
It is. And a lot of trial and error, and a lot of just thinking in terms of just trying to figure out how to do this, because at the end of the day, I'm more of a teacher than a practitioner, even though I do both. But I love teaching. I love being able to help people to see that they can do anything that I do. I know anyone else can do, because I wasn't just naturally born with this. This was something I had to really work hard at developing. I call it a skill, but it was something I was probably predisposed to do, but I didn't know I was. I didn't know myself well enough to know that was within me to be in that position. And probably the gift to me was just knowing that I had this depth of love and compassion inside of me that I really hadn't gotten in touch with. I just lived life, building my real estate business and doing all of these things, and just hadn't really gotten to that level. But this was a whole different world of spirit and emotion, and being able to feel a connection with the human essence that I had never felt before. It was really a journey. And one that, I absolutely appreciate having taken that step.
Yeah, I think it's very remarkable when you come from where you're at. You actually often get surprised how much mm-hmm. more there is that you didn't realize was there.
Right.
Rather than this trying to be somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Than you are actually at. So like you're saying, okay, she came in, and when she asked that question, I said, I don't know, I'll see, right? What comes, right? And that's often very surprising what happens. And yeah, and when, like you said, I think it's one of the main things you said was that you need to come from the right space, in the sense that you come from your sincerest present moment, right, of wanting to help, or wanting to be helpful. I guess is the most important thing, right? Wanting to be helpful and choosing to be helpful as best as you know how at that moment.
Now, first of all, do no harm, and then second, is always have the highest sense of concern and love and attention toward that person's well-being. And as long as you're in that space, generally you'll go in the direction of getting the information that is needed at that time. And that's the important part. I remember talking about, living from a humble space, really. I remember the first time I taught at a large retreat. It was about 700 students that I was teaching. And I was not accustomed to being in the presence of that many people that was looking at me as having some kind of, elevated answer for them. They kind of put you on a pedestal. And I remember after the first day of teaching, it was a 5-day teaching situation. But the first day that I was teaching, the students were coming up to me, and of course they just kind of worship the ground you walk on, which is not something I was used to. And they started saying things like, "Oh, like you're the Christ energy to the point that you're the second coming," or da da da. And I'm thinking it was feeding my ego, is what it was doing. And so, and I was not prepared for that. I mean, I wasn't. And so my head started swelling, with this egotistical sort of thing. And I thought, I can't work this way. I've got to get this under control. It took me about 2 days to really push that back into a space that it needed to belong, because I knew I could not be sincere and honest if I didn't come from my heart. And as long as they were feeding my ego, it was going to come from my head, thinking I was better than or knew something beyond. What I knew was what I knew, and that's what I was giving and teaching. But I knew I had to teach from my heart. It's the only way it could be sincere or authentic. And so I understand how when people are put in those power positions, they can sometimes get really full of themselves and kind of exceed that and no longer come from the heart. But if you're not coming from the heart, you really don't have any authenticity, I don't think, to share.
Yeah, I think it's so important to accept what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's getting to your head, this and that. You might even state it, right? You're all telling me how wonderful I am and so on. And I really want to speak with you the way I am right now, and I cannot tell you that everyone is wonderful. I can just tell you that everyone is wonderful, and I'm just one of us, right? Of this. We all have that in us. That's what I want to give you, and I don't want to tell you that I'm any better than you.
Absolutely. And the thousands upon thousands of intuitive sessions I've done for people, I can honestly say that when you come from that heart space and you see their heart space, and when those two align and you see no one is better or less or more than anyone else, it is truly every individual, I think, has, regardless of their life circumstance and regardless of personality and ego, when you get to that place in their heart, when you get to that energy that is the depth of their soul, you see a different side of them. You see a different person, and everyone is absolutely beautiful from that space.
Yes, and that's so. And of course, in Miracles, it also says that we are infinitely valuable in the mind of God. So if God sees you that way, you're supposed to see yourself that way too, and it's quite a challenge, right? And see everyone that way, right? And that's the road that we're taking, right? Where we haven't mastered it by any means, but it's the road we want to take, and that's very important when you're teaching, of course, to make that clear. That's where you're heading and what you want, no matter how often you might stumble and get carried away or think you're better or someone else is better than you, because once you think you're better, you will also find someone you think is better than you. Yeah. And so it's like in A Course in Miracles, it speaks of the difference between specialness and equality. And specialness is not who we are, right? We are not special. We are equal. Not in the sense that we don't have any particular abilities or anything. That has nothing to do with it. We do have special functions or whatever, but that doesn't make us special.
Right. That's true. And going back to the theme of this show, getting the life you want, I think, some people feel like they deserve everything and some people feel like they deserve nothing. But at the core, we all have the power to improve our lives and to improve the station of our lives and to have more of what is desired. And, some people may, want to go into big business, but some other people may just want to live in the country and have a horse, and that's not for me to judge. And neither is one better or worse than the other. It's simply what that person desires. So it's success in life. And some people look at my word success in my book, S.P.I, Your Way to Power and Success, as being something that I'm saying, that's all corporate and, money and making. It's like, no, success is when you have created the life that satisfies you and you are happy in that life experience. That is success. That is power and success, to be able to know yourself and create that life that you want.
Yeah, it says in A Course in Miracle, the will of God is our perfect happiness.
Hmm.
So anything that we are interpreting to be a reason to not be happy is certainly a wrong interpretation. So actually, we're pretty much wrong most of the time. So it's actually, in the terms of A Course in Miracles, we can be happy we're wrong.
Yes. Hmm.
Being wrong actually makes you happy, or gets happiness to show itself. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being authentic with who you are. I mean, getting just past all the layers of the persona that of who we think we are. And if you can get down to the reality of the individual, that that at the heart of who you are, that is where you're going to find the secret to really finding the answers, because that's where it all is. That's where God lives within us, not in the ego, not in all of the artificial presence, in the world, but it's really down deep inside of us that exists.
Yeah, and one of the most challenging things, especially when you're feeling awful, is the idea that God is always present, right?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
this presence of God, you may be denying it when you're doing bad or whatever, but it still is there.
Mhm.
And so this even within the worst of experiences, there still is something there that can help you to use it for good, right?
Mhm.
Let's put it that way. The Holy Spirit can use everything for good, as it says, of course, in Miracles, or God can use everything for good, would be another way of putting it. So everything is useful, even the horrible experiences we go through can be very useful. And that's why it's so, I don't know how you see it, but I think it's so important that you don't stop teaching because you're doing horrible, right? You continue teaching.
You continue to improve, if you're
Yeah.
paying attention, especially because it's that trial and error. That's what life is. It's kind of a, to attempt to move through life and to be able to figure out how to have that essence of spirit with you throughout each day, to manifest with, to be content with, and granted, all of the things in life, that if you don't see them as a failure, then you can see them as a stepping stone to something that is better.
Yeah, you can. There's many ways of putting that, but yes, is all useful for
Mhm.
recognizing who we are,
Right.
and also it's useful to others often,
Mhm.
and one forgets that that's useful to others. I know there's all this ranting about when people are complaining or unhappy or this and that they would be harming others and drawing them into this darkness and so on, right? But if they're being honest about it, it can actually also be part of connecting, and that is healing. That is healthy to connect, and
Mhm.
that's where. So it's a quite a important fact that connecting can happen at any time, and connection is when it's happening from that point of view, right? From understanding that we can actually be vulnerable, be in pain, be in whatever else, and still be of help and of service. That is
Absolutely.
quite
Mhm.
powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember a moment where I, was disgruntled about something, and it was this just awakening whenever I thought, well, don't focus on those feelings of being, dissatisfied with whatever it was, angry about something or whatever. But what is it that you're really seeking? Because there's a reason that emotion is there. But if you can go into the area, what if that I really want? What am I seeking? And focus on your energy toward gaining that, rather than to be upset or angry about something. And that was a real eye-opening moment, because it really shifted my thoughts. So it was a valuable moment. The anger served me in that it taught me how to see deeper within myself.
Yeah, one of the statements from A Course in Miracles that mirrors that is, you're never upset for the reason you think you are.
Right. Right.
So yes, you need to go deeper and find out another way of seeing it, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, another way of seeing it, another way of approaching it, and then that's where we really take, that part of that empowerment within us is to understand how we can and we do have the power to change things in our lives, to move forward in a different way, and to be able to recognize that if we're not focusing over here on the disgruntled part, we can focus on the positive part of moving energies toward more of what we want rather than what we don't want.
Yeah, it's always a question: are you in this moment capable of not focusing on focusing on the solution rather than the problem? It's not always in your cards at that moment, but it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to look at what's going on and accept it or get angry about it or whatever is needed, because we do cry a lot. We do have a lot of pain that we move through when we are starting to look at. And even if you start looking at solutions, doesn't mean that pain won't show up.
Yeah.
And so you'll need to face it either way. So yeah, it's quite a...
It may be a journey. Yeah, it may be a journey to get there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, and like I said, I think it's so amazing that we can be of service no matter where we're at in that journey. And if we start recognizing that, we tend to, it becomes less important to lash out at others or at yourself when you start accepting that. It doesn't mean that it's an easy journey or anything. It's really hard for me personally, and it's challenging, and for others as well. As far as I know, I've heard many people going through hardship and don't know any other way than to lash out or do harmful things at times. And that might go beyond that. But the beauty of it is that the acknowledging of it and allowing yourself to see it at least gets you to let go of this huge amount of brutality that would come from denying yourself to express what you're feeling, what you're going through.
Right. Yeah, and I think you express it, acknowledge it, know that is how you've responded to a given situation, and then move yourself into what would most resolve this problem that you've got inside of you, this issue that is frustrating you or causing this pain. And sometimes that's easy to move out of, and sometimes that's a really difficult thing. I know, just as a health intuitive, I often do sessions for people that have really chronic issues, either chronic pain or they're facing, death in a few months or something like that. And those are really sad situations. So sometimes there's nothing that I'm going to say or do that's going to change that for them. But what I can do, and oftentimes what I have noticed with people, is just being present with them, just to be there in that situation with them, with a full sense of connection with them, and where they don't feel alone. If that's all I have to offer, that's what I have to offer. But sometimes we can be frustrated, but sometimes we can calm those seas of frustration by just being present with what it is that we're dealing with, and to not assume that it's just going to go away like blowing a leaf across a yard. It may still be present. It may be a rooted tree, that may be still part of us in our life situation. But keeping an open heart helps. I know I took care of my parents for 5 years at the end of their life journey, and it was very trying to see them losing their their autonomy. It was hard to see them. It was difficult to see them losing the joy that they had in life because they couldn't do much in those last 5 years. They lived to be, in their 90s, so they were up in years. But it was very disheartening, and they stayed home, and I did a lot of the caretaking and oversaw other caretakers that came in, and I recognized that it would be so easy, and was at times so easy, to just fall into a state of resentment, and that totally consuming my life. But one thing that I did know from the work I'd done is, if I can keep my sense of love and compassion and caring open, my heart open to this situation, it will not have that impact upon me. I will not go into resentment. So every time I would feel myself going that direction toward that sense of anger or resentment, I would just pull myself back, open up my heart chakra, would be totally 100% present with them, and in love and compassion for their state. And just thankful they were with me, thankful I had the energy to be able to do what I was doing, thankful I had the financial capacity to do what I was doing, just being gratitude and appreciation and love in their presence. And that got me through 5 years without health issues, without a lot of grudgery about everything. It was actually such a blessing to be able to spend that time with them over those last 5 years. It was just, but I could have had an exact opposite attitude toward that. I could have felt like it took 5 years. I gave up my business during that time in order to be with them and take care of them. I could have resented the money I lost. I could have resented the time it took. I could have resented the tiredness that I felt, over it all. I could have resented so many things. But I did recognize that if I go into that resentment, I will probably end up getting sick. And if I can stay in love, then it will help me to stay balanced inside of my body, mind, and spirit. So there's a way that we can approach things from different points of view that can be most helpful to us to be able to manage life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people who are taking care of others or need to do everything for most things for others can get into, this total state of resentment and anger and frustration and whatever else comes with it. And yes, like you said, it will that's also something that the person who's being taken care of will feel and will also feel guilty for. Mm-hmm. And so it's like the person already would feel guilty, right? Yes. And then someone comes and is resentful and angry at them for putting them in the situation that they need to take care of them and so on. So yes, I think that's a very important point. Maybe you have some pointers of how you can let go of that resentment when you are taking care of people, because that is really, really a big one. When people are going through the hardest times and you are the caretaker.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really a difficult thing. And I can say all of the practice that I had doing the intuitive work, the health intuitive work, all of the work, the teaching, everything that I'd done had prepared me for that time period that I took care of them, because I knew how to get into that space inside of me, because I had to get there every session that I did, every class that I taught, every person I did a session for. I had to be in that space. I knew how to, on command, open that heart chakra and be in that state of love and compassion. So that was something I had practiced a lot to learn to do. And that's just something as part of the courses I teach is not, I don't live in that state 100% of the time by any means, but I know how to be in that state when needed. If there's something that bothers me or troubles me or whatever, I just open up into that space. I also recognize, because of just a lot of self-awareness, when I'm out of that state, when I need to be back in that state. And I'm a firm believer that, vibration meets vibration, and that when we can live in that state, if there's any kind of conflict or problems or something that's not quite perfect in our world, if we can just go into that heart space, either ask a question, get an intuitive input about it, or just meet the situation with love and openness, then the environment even changes around us. Things will be easier because everyone will recognize They may not consciously recognize it, but energetically they will recognize who you are and where you're coming from in your state of concern about the situation or life, or how to compromise, or how to approach life. One of the things I noticed early on is I've owned a lot of businesses, owned a couple of software development companies, and then owned a real estate brokerage for a long time. And since like the 80s, I owned a real estate brokerage. And real estate is one of those things that it's kind of a sue happy kind of industry. And what I noticed was no one ever sued us. I still haven't been sued, and thank God for that. But I think a lot of it has to do with just being an ethical person and treating people right and not taking advantage of anyone, but also just living from that heart space. It's like you just don't cause harm. And when you don't cause harm, other people recognize that. And first of all, there isn't a reason to sue me, but you don't cause harm for people, and that vibration meets a vibration of people don't cause harm to you either. And so that's a place to live from. That's a goal to live from. And I can't say that I always live from that space, but certainly upon going into the intuitive work and understanding more about how energies work in life, I certainly feel like that I live more from that space the last 40 years of my life, more than the first 40 years of my life. Well, I'm only 72, so I guess the last 32 years of my life.
Yeah, I think that's a very important part of it for sure, because we're deciding to be fair, to be ethical, to be, and all these things make a huge difference also when people come to you, right? Because if you have the impression that someone is trying to get the better of you, that's not a great feeling.
No.
And then you will try to get the better of them, maybe, right? And then that's certainly going to separate. It's not a connection. Right. And connection is what is so helpful, right?
Mm-hmm. The connection and understanding, that life, how reality, unfolds in our life has a lot to do with how we approach it, and just being able to understand that more and utilize that, not in a way that is, oh, well, if I feel this way, I'm going to get ahead, because that isn't intent. Your intent has to be real and authentic. It can't be a facade. It can't be faked. It just doesn't work that way. It has to be real, truthful, and honest.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's really beautiful, the way you shared how it's so important to stay in that state of love as whenever it's needed. Of course, yeah, like you said, maybe we don't know how to do that all the time, or don't do it all the time. But if you learn to choose that space, it certainly is helpful. And so many conflicts that have come up over the years have been resolved that way. I mean, and I've heard, one hears stories of people who came into a situation where I don't know what could have happened, right? And then they spoke in a certain way or acted in a certain way, and the whole conflict was diffused.
Yes, that's true, very often. And oftentimes it's just because you acknowledged the other side of the picture. It's like, and oftentimes we can compromise and everyone's comfortable and happy with what the result is if we don't get too caught up in getting our way or being right about every little thing.
Yeah, another quote from A Course in Miracles: do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy?
Right. True. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's quite challenging, right? We want to love with when we feel needy, we want to be right. We want to get acknowledged that we know, and the other person sees it that way, or we want to have the other person see it the same way we do, and just agree with us, and so on. All these ideas of needing to agree on things can also have to do with this neediness and this wanting to be right. And that certainly is the path to being unhappy, according to A Course in Miracles. And I think that's true in life as well, not
Right.
just because the book says it.
Right. It's true. It's a good observation for sure.
Yeah. So is there any question I haven't asked you that you would like to answer?
I can't think of anything. I think it's been rather thorough.
Okay. Then would you like to end with a message or something you would like to share with people so that they have something to take with them at the end?
Yeah, I think just kind of recap a lot of what we've talked about is really encouraging people that, first of all, they have way more power than they often step into. They don't often realize just how powerful they really are. But the second thing is to just go deep, in meditation, go deep in your own sense of self and start really looking hard at your own individuality. Who are you? What do you feel? What do you want in life? And don't feel like what people have handed you in life is what you necessarily have to live with. You can discover your own way. You can discover what works for you. And discover what is meaningful to you. You just go deeper into yourself. We live in kind of a really artificial world these days, so we have to really work hard at getting to know ourselves. We're removed from nature to such a high degree. We're removed from even community and as well. And I think we have to just really work harder these days than we used to really feel a sense of connection with one another.
Yeah, and like we were speaking of, I think one of the greatest things you can do for someone who's going through hardship is to provide them that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Because independent of whether you can solve it or not, or they know how to can solve it or not, that connection is already incredibly helpful.
Yes.
I think that's a very important takeaway from our conversation.
Yeah, and oftentimes when I would do an intuitive session, I recognized and they recognized it's not the words I'm saying. It's that heartfelt healing that happens when you get to that level of love and you get to that level of deep, deep compassionate connection. It's that state that is being sought. And often answers will come within you, your own intuition, rather than the words that I would say even. It's not an external thing, it's an internal thing that happens. And that is often what we're seeking in life.
Yeah, and that's why connection allows us to have that come up. It's this feeling of being disconnected, separate, and so on that actually gets in the way of it. So actually that is an amazing thing, an amazing way of being helpful. And like you said, it's not about the words. It's not about the particular setting either. It's about that connection. And that's what's most important. And that, yeah, there's many different ways that can look like for people and can be experienced in.
Right.
And so, yeah, and it can even be a podcast that people watch. They can feel more connected with themselves, with others, with the world, with who they are, because they get to listen to it.
True.
So in that sense, I would like to say thank you, Linda, for being here, for joining me, and providing that space. And thank you, everyone who joins and listens at whatever time you do that. Thank you so much. Please spread the word about the podcast, review it, and subscribe so that more people find it. And if you want to be a guest, reach out to me so that we can arrange that. Blessings to you all, and until next time.